Hi, this is Paul. I don't have a lot of time before Rando's Convo, but I want to see if I can get this in. Jordan Peterson's been doing more interviews lately, which is, I think, a good thing. He's talking to friends. I think that's a really wise thing. He looks good. He sounds good. He sounds healthy. He's interrupting less, which I think is a good thing because I think that also goes along the line that he's talking with friends, and so he's comfortable. And he's obviously getting stronger. He's more like his old self. And one of the things that I noted in listening to, I haven't listened to the Douglas Murray one yet. I've listened to the other two. That there's more little nugget wisdom nuggets, insights that are thrown throughout. And this has always been one of the real treats about Jordan's work, that when he talks, he just continues to throw out. He's obviously been thinking about a lot of things for a very long time, and it's all sort of there in his head, and it's in the context of the moment that either an insight or an observation that he might have made in the past, might have observed in the past, and out it comes. And when it comes out in a context, well, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the what is knowledge, and the different aspectual, relational, parabolic, perspectival nature of knowledge. And so I think these are strong forms for Jordan. And he kind of tosses these little things out, and there are plenty of them in these interviews, especially in the Greg Hurwitz interviews. Now, Greg Hurwitz has been on his channel before. He's obviously a long-term friend of Greg. Greg was a former student of his, and my guess is that this interview won't be watched anywhere near as much, obviously, as the Matthew McConaughey interview or even the Douglas Murray interview. But that's a shame, because there's a lot you can learn about Jordan in this interview, and I think a lot of wisdom in it. And maybe just for me, because in terms of some of my background, I'm sort of on a similar page politically as Hurwitz. Now, one of the things I really appreciated about this is that I think you get a much clearer picture of Jordan Peterson. Has been, basically, there was a hit job done on him very early on by the mass media, and they wanted to portray him and marginalize him. They wanted to mute his voice. They wanted to, in a sense, inoculate people against him because he was not supporting their line, and he was as I said in my previous video, I'm sure there's some people that, well, Jordan Peterson radicalized Paul Vanderklay, and it's like, people who know me well should know better than that. And sometimes people will refer to my father, and, well, if you knew my father well, you'd know better than that. My father was an exceedingly balanced, fair man, and the kinds of ways that he grew to love and serve and give his life for the African American community grew out of a larger love for Christ and humanity. He was loving his God through the people in front of him, and my father would do that for anyone, regardless of their skin color, of their nationality. As one of a pastor who was an intern of mine here in Sacramento went on to pastor the church that my parents went to. My mother still goes there. My father passed, of course, in Massachusetts. He basically said, your father would give Adolf Hitler a fair hearing, and he would. My father was that kind of man, and so there's been this hit job done on Jordan Peterson in terms of his reputation. And it's completely unfair, but good luck getting anyone to sit down and listen to this 2-hour interview, even with someone with Democratic Party credentials like Greg Hurwitz, although I'm sure after an interview like this, Greg Hurwitz's Democratic Party credentials are not good. The Democratic Party is, of course, broad, just like the Republican Party. There are wings, there are aspects. If you've got a two-party system, you've got to cram a whole lot of different people and values and aspects into these two parties. But I thought it was an excellent conversation seeking, and this, again, was classic Jordan. It was so good to see him this healthy and this well, seeking balance, wisdom, nuance, complexity, truth. That really came out that, as even as Joe Biden has said, America needs America needs a healthy Republican Party. America needs at least two healthy parties. And right now we've got two parties. And in my opinion, neither of them are healthy at all. Maybe we need more parties. America hasn't really been able to break out of the two-party system. We'll see if that changes. But everybody in democracy gets a chance to have a political opinion. And that's basically part of the ground rules of democracy. And it needs to be respected. And that goes clear across the board. Now, I wanted to play a couple of clips, and those of you who are watching on video notice that I'm continuing to play with new slide formats. And this early on, again, I'll see if I have enough time to do it before my randos conversation. This one was sort of a logos aha moment. What do I mean by a logos aha moment? I use lowercase l for logos instead of uppercase L for logos, but I think this is part of the gift that Jordan Peterson was for many, that he would say things sometimes and it was like, oh yeah, I'd sort of, that was sort of hazy in my thought. I was sort of seeing that, but once somebody says it, it's like, okay, now I can see it. Now I can know it. It's sort of the idea of the parabolic knowing emerging into consciousness and coming out. And that's part of what logos does, is that it takes something which is intuitive and makes it clear and sharp. So let's see if I can work out my new arrangement here and get this clip up and maybe do a little bit of commenting on it. Here we go.
There's different skews and everything is a generalization, right? So I'm going to generalize a little bit. I think that there's, in the far right, we see a kind of corruption and ossification around sort of Donald Trump and what he represents. But he was saying things that hit people in a way that were things that they weren't allowed to say.
Now, one of the things I'm really hoping for now with the end of the Trump presidency is that we can talk. Because part of what was so disruptive about the last 6 years is that we haven't been able to talk. Once you mention Donald Trump's name in one group or the other, people would just freak out. You had Donald Trump derangement syndrome over on the left, and you had such Donald Trump loyalists over on the right. You couldn't offer a reasonable critique or an ability to actually process or discern. And so I'm hoping some of that comes. Now, of course, I know for a lot of you, Hurwitz is not going to be respected. So that's fine. Like I said, in a democracy, everybody gets to have a political opinion. Him included, you included. So, and I thought, again, the two clips I'm going to play, I thought these were both very helpful.
I have a whole bunch of theories about the Republicans. I'm going to keep it focused on my looking in the proverbial mirror. I think that a lot of the language policing of the left is actually a way to maintain the status quo.
And I think this is a key observation here about language and community. We've done a fair amount of talking about, on the religious aspect, about propositional. We talk about it often as propositional knowledge, but in many ways it's propositional language. And there's been a fair amount of complaint about the ways that propositional language in the post-Reformation era, confessionality, is used to label, to segment. Now, I've got a sort of a glut of videos. I'll probably release them in order so the glut will be passed. Likely, I've got jury duty next week, so well, maybe I'll jump this video ahead. But I had some really terrific conversations this week, and I've got more lined up. So I'm trying to stockpile some videos ahead of jury duty. I think I might, in fact, have this video jump the queue. little teaser for some of the conversations, because again, once I have Jordan Peterson in a conversation like this, that there'll be more hits for something like this than some of my other videos. And I like to give a little bit of promotion to the conversations, because the conversations, I think, are in many ways the beating heart of this channel, because the conversations are ways in which I can step out of my bubbles. And again, just like everybody gets to have a political opinion, everybody gets to have a religious opinion. But the propositionality of the boundaries, I think, is important here. And a lot of the policing of those boundaries happens with language. And what Hurwitz is noting, that this is what's been happening in the political realm, and this is a constant thing in a religious realm.
Because what status quo? And to whose advantage?
Let's say that you're...
And again, I mean, looking at Peterson like this is... He's a lot healthier than he's been. He's sharp. He's to the point. He asked an incisive question. That's just exciting for me to see.
Rich Hollywood elite, much like me.
But not just, I hate to name names in some of these political things, but, the governor of the state that I live in, Gavin Newsom, I watch Gavin Newsom and I hear all this chatter about white privilege, and it's like, this is the most privileged guy you could almost imagine. I mean, just go to the Wikipedia page about Gavin Newsom. And now I don't know him personally. I don't want to just throw him under the bus reputationally. I don't want to take a cheap shot, but and it isn't just white Hollywood elites that Hurwitz is pointing to. So much of this language I find on the lips of people who have little or no lived experience with the kinds of communities they purport to defend.
Right. Or somebody who is in the kinds of groups that I move in, that you move in, but let's say further left of you, like I am, or more, we're both liberal. But if you can talk and have all of the lingo and know exactly what the permission structures are, and you say Latin X instead of Latino, and you do all this stuff, and in a way, what you're doing is you're making sure that the conversations that are the real conversations that bring change, that are messier, don't necessarily occur. But if you have all the language down, you can sort of...
Again, you're making sure that the real conversations, the honest conversations, the conversations we need to be having don't occur. And I thought that is exactly the dynamic. And so when he said that, I thought, bang, bingo, right there. You're silencing people. You're silencing often people in the middle. You're silencing people who actually have life experience. You're silencing the kinds of people that you say, these people need a voice. And then you go and silence them with this language game.
Maintain your position don't necessarily occur. But if you have all the language down, you can sort of maintain your position and your money and your relative stature.
Yeah, so right. you can assume that if there was a solution that was being proposed, you'd be part of the solution and not part of the problem. You signal that with the language.
But you're also you're casting, like, look, I'll give you an example. I made a video about for me, I was exceedingly opposed from day one to messages of chaos from the Democratic Party. Right. I think conservatives particularly have a reaction to chaos. I think they have a legitimate reaction when people announce sort of, police-free zones in Seattle and in Portland. And from day one, I was saying this whole notion of sanctuary cities doesn't make sense to me for a variety of reasons. Let's say we have the next president and people decide that voting rights are not going to be applied to in, Birmingham, Alabama.
He is exactly right. He is exactly right. And part of having a system where everybody gets to have a political opinion, everybody gets to speak their political opinion, everybody gets to speak their religious opinion, and there can be structures. You can have private structures, and now we see this with Twitter and some. So this is a private structure. Okay, well, religious colleges are private structures. You're saying, okay, these people ought to be able to police this on Twitter. Well, aren't these private, religious, and business, aren't these other private structures fair game for people doing what they want? Free speech, all of that. I see Hurwitz as really trying to pursue some fair brokerage here.
Right. And they're going to be a sanctuary city for that. There's all these complexities around it. I made some commercials about Black leadership calling for a lack of violence in the protests. Keisha Lance Bottom, the mayor of Atlanta, gave a speech that I think was a speech with the most thundering moral authority that I've heard from a public figure when Atlanta was tearing itself apart. It's an extraordinary speech. I reference other people. The only blowback that I got from that was from incredibly affluent, sort of coastal elite saying, how dare you, selectively quote, African-American people decrying violence, when they watch somebody get murdered and they're protesting how they can. And it's the epitome of white privilege and it's all this stuff. And what's interesting is I've long thought that Trump works through projection. Like everything with Trump that he makes as a claim for others, there's a lot of projection that goes on. And I've increasingly seen that from aspects of the left where I thought, wow, how far do you have to be removed from the ramifications of violence to not be worried? Like, how many houses and mansions and security guards and gated communities do you have to have access to be unconcerned with violent action? Whether that community is a community of color, right? Whether it's a white working class community, to simply say violent protest is something that we're not for. Like, how dare you advocate that when you're rich enough to never have to be there when the tourist violent protesters leave and let's say the Black community is left there with the wreckage of their community. Like, to be opposed to.
And again, he said that is so true. I mean, even, okay, I'm not making moral equivalence one way or the other, but there was just on our local news, Rockland man, he was up there on the stage in the Capitol, and he had taken things from Nancy Pelosi's desk. And I thought, this dude flew all the way across the country to do this. But D.C. is a much more public place than some protest tourist going to another city because, hey, I hear they're going to be tearing up Portland. I want to be part of the scene. And yeah, or Kenosha, Wisconsin, or how many different places. And it's like, hey, people live in this neighborhood. If you destroy the businesses here, for years I've heard all this talk about food deserts in communities where I live. Well, there's not enough supermarkets, and this is an example of racism that the better supermarkets are not in my neighborhood. And when they were doing a shopping mall next door, everybody in the neighborhood is like, we want a Trader Joe's in here. They came to the neighborhood association, and the city basically said, Trader Joe's ain't coming. Why? Trader Joe's has a particular metric that they look for, and they're not coming to your neighborhood. Now, Trader Joe's has shown some independence with their salsa names, et cetera, but Whole Foods, and you can have You can have a woke as woke Apple store, but it is not coming to Florin Road. And that's just the reality. And so I look at this and I listen to this language and I say to Black folks, how can you on one hand say that this is all white supremacy and these are all these white people, but that yet you're pinning your hopes that they're somehow going to save you? They aren't coming. In a lot of ways, you're on your own. And that's going to mean working hard to keep your family together and working hard to educate your children and trying as best you can. And the families that I know that have done it, they've done it. They've been disciplined. They've been almost always religious. They've worked hard to try to build their communities. And this has been going on for decades. And then all of this stuff comes and it's like this language game is going to somehow, these flags are going to somehow change things. And I have a suspicion that Hurwitz is right, that this is, well, if you're white and wealthy, well, just talk this way, and well, it's not going to help if they're deciding to go through your neighborhood. But suddenly, it was amazing. All of this defund the police. Defund the police we heard nothing of it when, of course, when DC, where were the police? Well, maybe I shouldn't even make this video.
That message is basically saying, I want to keep letting people protest as loud as they want. It's in a way that won't ever affect me, or my children aren't at risk. My family's not at risk. My house doesn't feel at risk. But I'll use all the right language so that I can be protected and sort of maintain all of that. And when you're trying to wade in to really win an election so that we don't, the African-American community doesn't have to contend with more, I'll call it more voter rights being thrown out, like real concrete issues. There's real concrete issues there. But if you can chirp about something that's a slogan like that, you don't have to get into the real solutions or fixes. But at the same time,
right? But you can take on the assumed status of someone who's actually working to solve the problem. I think a lot of politically correct language, I guess that would be language that's in alignment with any given doctrine, is an attempt to take on the moral virtues of that doctrine without necessarily having to bear any of the responsibility for actions in alignment with that doctrine, or to bear any responsibility for the consequences.
And this was, and what Peterson said right there, a nice little logos nugget where he puts this in. And when I first started seeing the woke stuff, I just thought, this is just Calvinism all over again. And it's not the good kind of Calvinism. It's sort of being able to say, I'm totally depraved, and therefore I'm totally depraved. But as Peterson says, no, if you take on the responsibility of your depravity, and of course you can have two people say the same words, and for one, it's sort of you can twist that, and again, this is exactly what we've seen in the broader culture. You can twist that and turn that into a vehicle for social advantage. And again, I've seen these games played in the church forever, and now it's just played in the broader society.
Like, I was furious when the protests erupted with George Floyd. There were video after video of African Americans protesting. Some of them were turning in people who were either, anarchists who were throwing bricks and committing property damage, of saying, grabbing people, handing them over to the police. A lot of people in the African American community were like, this is our community. We live here. And of course, I'm not implying that nobody in the African American community crossed a line in the course of those protests. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there was an awareness within that community that when the cameras are gone and the lights go up, nobody's going to come in and rebuild that community. And when all the tourists leave and everybody's had their march and their protest, they have to contend with it. And there was a measure.
Everybody's had their little moral moment, their little bit of religious political enthusiasm.
Discipline in that community, whether it was Keisha Lance Bottoms. I think the president of the NAACP in either Oregon or Washington had a great op-ed. Killer Mike, the rapper, was out there saying, we cannot have violence. We're not tearing down our own city. This isn't civil disobedience. The point of civil disobedience, of course, is that you bear the cost. You bear the moral responsibility of your transgression of the law.
Right, exactly.
African community understood this by and large. And a lot of the loudest voices who were protesting against it, who were for me was a frustration, were from incredibly affluent, and here I'll use the word privilege, which I don't like to use, people in the white community. And that for me it's a similar kind of projection as I would see Trump doing. Like, they're screaming about privilege all the time. And you're like, how do you not understand that destruction of property, destruction of small businesses, risks to families? Look, I'll give you a stat that's an interesting stat here. The average voter who voted for Obama and then Trump thinks about politics on average 4 minutes a week. 4 minutes a week, right? So people in the bubble don't think about politics 4 minutes a week. And so 4 minutes a week is about what you can manage to worry about the emoluments clause and Russian hacking when you're at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You got a sick kid, you're out of health insurance, and you don't have a job. You might have a special needs kid. You might have a parent in a home. You have COVID hitting. You don't have time for any of this. You don't have time to have the kinds of conversations around nuance of weather. And when everyone was shocked about the Latin vote, I was just thinking, how many of you people actually have friends and family who are Hispanic who you talk to? I mean, the joke was that the big shock was that Biden won the Latin X vote and Trump won the Latino vote.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the Latino community, I mean, they don't.
So what do you think accounted for Trump's attractiveness to the Latino community? This kind of ties back in. This ties some back into a broader question I want to ask you. It's like, I've been interested in what you've been doing and supporting it to the degree that I've been able to, and to the degree that that's useful.
Okay, I want to go to another clip now. In this clip, he's going to talk more about evangelical Christians, and I'm really impressed with his ability to listen, his ability to not just to take the time to listen, and then to do a level of discernment about it. I was really impressed by this clip too.
Part of it is the respectful conversation with Trump voters, or mostly. I'm sure I screwed up plenty, but and to do a unifying message and to show them. One of the things people don't realize is that messaging becomes content. If we could get the message right, we could solidify the story, and then that could change policy, and then that can change the Democratic platform. Okay, so right?
And actually, I've listened to this now 3 times. And so he plays political commercials that he made, and I found those political commercials a little annoying, frankly, because like, oh, you're making propaganda. And he knows he's making propaganda. But part of what's interesting is that what it notes there is that there is sort of a circle that happens here, and that in that once people find a story that, and it's really mysterious how we work at this, once people find a story that sort of fits for them, the story becomes the policy. And we're seeing that on the other side now. We're seeing that dynamic all over the place. And this, I think, gets somewhat into the parabolic thinking conversation that we're having with Mark and Mary and John Vervaeke, that, well, if you have the both sides of the brain here, and we're going back and forth, you have the intuitive side, which is the unmapped territory, and it's all this fuzzy thinking, it's all this intuition, and it's all this relationality and comparing, and dad is to knife and mom is to fork and baby to spoon. Well, by the time we're able to articulate a story, you're using the other side of the brain to articulate that story. You're using the logic, the logos, the small L logos to articulate that story. Well, once you see that, once that gets instantiated in the other side of the brain, the left side of the brain, or I'm dyslexic. I can't keep the left and the right straight. I never could. So the right side of the brain, it's right. Gosh, I'm a mess. The intuitive side of the brain, I think, sees that and continues. So you have this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between them. And so I like his points here. I like his point here about the story then begins to perpetuate and then to impact policy.
So we talked a lot about that when you first embarked on this venture. So, and correct me if I'm wrong about as far as you're concerned, about anything that I'm saying. The first thing is that if you produce a message, a story, that story has an ethic, has an implicit ethic. And if the story is accepted, then the implicit ethic is accepted. And then the implicit ethic will be made explicit across time. So a story is like, it's like the seed ground for explicit policy. So that's you got a grip on the story. Now, one of the things that concerned me about the radical left was that because they had a story, and it's a powerful mythological story, benevolent nature, tyrannical culture, the noble savage. That's another part of it.
And again, I mean, this is why Peterson is so good. Look at what he's bringing in here. Look at what, and again, all of this is subject to critique, but he's open to critique. And, you know, the fact that, you know, I make these clips of his videos and others make clips of his videos, I mean, he could take this down if he really wanted to, along with a lot of the other clip videos he could take down. But he understands that this what we're doing here, we're, you know, this distributed cognition, we're distributing our cognition with each other, and he's influencing me back and forth. It's, again, I am so glad to see Jordan back in the game.
Because they had a coherent story, they had a disproportionate effect on policy. And the moderate Democrats...
Not on policy. So let me just interrupt.
Okay.
Not on policy. So if you look at... So AOC did the Green New Deal, pushed that through, which to me was not an adult piece of legislation. It was a Trojan horse filled with everything. 0 votes in the Senate. 0 votes from the Democrats. Every measure, if you look at HR1, is anti-corruption. It was prescription drug. There was... The actual policies and body of who the Democrats are is much more moderate and pro-capitalist than it is in policy. So what's being parroted loudly is not, in fact, Democratic policy. In my estimation, the flaw or the fault in the Democratic Party is their failure to stand up and keep the elements of the party in their proper places, to state who they are and to draw a line for what they're opposed to. And I think that act of them being like, well, we can't really, we're concerned to criticize.
And I think this is partly where a lot of the mass media plays in, because I've had similar thoughts with Hurwitz about the Democratic Party, but what parts of it are, how is it being played and portrayed in the media?
You know, defund the police, or we're too concerned.
Yeah.
Part of what I would say to them was, look, if you're scared of AOC's Twitter following, Americans are not going to deem you to be worthy of carrying the nuclear football. Like, that's just a very low checksum analysis. If you can't just clearly say that defunding the police, whether that means other things, which it does, is a slogan that makes no sense and terrifies the vast majority of Americans, rightly so, and a ton of immigrants, rightly so. Like, or you know, people of Hispanic origin, if you can't understand and state that clearly because you're afraid of the blowback, you're not going to be trusted to lead. And so it's a problem of degree. And I think that's one of the biggest topics of friction you and I have had for a long time. Not negative friction, but just where we've been hammering away at that, where I keep saying to you, the radical left is not the kind of threat in America relative to the threat that's posed by Donald Trump as it represents in Canada. And we can disagree about that, because I think that the threats represented by the radical left represent an equally dystopic and
I can tell
future.
you, like, I don't really understand it myself to some degree, is that I've been more, and this is a surprise to me, I would say, I've been more reactive to the threat posed by the radical leftists. And I think it's possible that it's because I'm in academia. And so
can I tell you why? I have a theory about why that is too.
Okay. Yeah.
My theory is that the right comes in the front.
You know, right there, it's Peterson's open to influence. I'm so happy to watch him in this video. I really, really am.
Door. They're like, here we are. The right comes in the front door. They're like, here we are. We want more money. We want more power. We don't like government. We're going to shrink it. Even the let's call it racism or anything that goes down from that pole to in-group favoritism, right? Like normal in-group favoritism. There's plenty of people who are like, look, I grew up in rural North Carolina. I'm fine with having a black president. I'm fine with doing whatever. This is my culture. I don't want to be asked to celebrate another culture all the time in every way or else be called racist. That doesn't make sense to me. Whereas the left comes in and they say, well, we like all of our stuff and we like our whole situation, like the examples I was giving earlier. We're going to say defund the police when we're rich enough to not be in a neighborhood that will have an effect of. We're above the pale that if everything is move through that lens. We're successful enough that we have money and we have resources anyways, and we're going to wrap ourselves in sanctimony, right? We're going to wrap ourselves in sanctimony, want to maintain the status quo as much as you do, but pretend it's because we're morally superior and you're morally inferior. And that's shame inducing. That's like a maternal scolding instinct that elicits, I think, rage. And so that's a big difference in the two. And I think that accounts for why some people are like, hey, look, it's complicated. There's this element of moral superiority. And one of the things that, I did so much work with the evangelical community, and they've been great, like making good faith arguments to reach out and talking about, the values and attributes of Christ and trying to talk to voters. And there were some voters who we were very successful in talking to. I want to say Obama got 26% evangelical vote. Hillary didn't go after it at all. She got 13 and lost, and Biden was back up at 22, 23. We thought that was a very important community to talk to. What people don't realize is if you look at Trump, if you look at anybody from a Christian worldview, you can dislike you can dislike him legally, you can dislike the policies, you can dislike a lot of these politicians, but the deeming of somebody as morally inferior, right? Whether it's followers of Trump, whether it's, MAGA voters, no one can do that but God. You're not allowed.
What's amazing to me is this observation that he makes. He doesn't identify, at least in this video, as an evangelical. I don't think he does at all. But I have seen how many Christians not get this. How many Christians from the left that just keep hammering on Christians who voted for Trump. And I see this in the religious blogs all the time. And he gets this point. And he's dead on right.
How to do that. You don't know where someone is on their journey. You don't know if he's a sinner at the nadir of his existence and is going to turn around. And there's a bigger, weird moral frame that gets put on it. Of course, there's aspects of that will come in from the right, with homosexuality, with the more racist element. But that aspect, if I'm arguing that the right has been more infected up the power structure by the worst authoritarian excesses of the right, I think that the narrative of moral judgment has infected a wider swath of the left, if that makes sense.
Well, it's worth thinking about anyways. I mean, it's a real mystery to me because I suspect that particularly because I'm Canadian, and so that puts me culturally to the left of the typical American, let's say. I suspect if I read through a list of policy decisions made by the Democrats and made by the Republicans over the last 20 years, and I was blind to the party who supported it, I would end up supporting more Democrat legislation than Republican legislation. But there's still something about the radicals on the left that disturb me in a way that.
Look, so here's another way to look at it, right? We've all seen Cape Fear, right? In Cape Fear, guy gets out of prison, he goes after his defense attorney. Criminals who are escaped, who do go after counsel, go after the defense attorney and not after the prosecutor. And the reason for that is percentage wise. And I believe that's true. I've heard that. I haven't sourced it, but let's pretend it's true for the sake of this parallel. I think a lot of what has happened is people figure the prosecutor's doing their job. But if your defense attorney who's supposed to be looking out for you doesn't, there's a different kind of anger. I think that's what the Democrats represent.
So it's a betrayal.
Yes, I think
that's interesting.
Here's the Uber statistic for everything for me that when I arrived at, I felt like the scales fell from my eyes. Over the last 40 or 50 years, $50 trillion with a T have moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. That's not through innovation, competition, and pure free market capitalism. It's just not. It's corporate giveaways. It's lobbyists writing bills. There's a whole structure.
It's the weird inevitability of the Pareto distribution, right? The idea, the age-old law that the rich get rich and the poor get poor. It's unbelievably difficult to keep that under control. And it is definitely something that destabilizes societies.
And that's the thing. And it's been done largely, that 50 trillion, Effects of globalization certainly play a role in that. But it's not like all of a sudden everybody who's a CEO got that much more brilliant. So this is the largest transfer of wealth, I believe, in history. And it didn't go a socialist way. That's when everyone's pulling their hair out about socialism. I just look at it and go, $50 trillion. So if you're white working class, and that happened under Obama, that happened under Clinton.
Yeah, well, that's the peculiar thing, is that it's not self-evident that policy can stop that. Like, one of the things.
And that'll go for a while, as you could imagine. But anyway, so when I first saw the video, I thought, I'm probably not going to watch this. The political stuff, yeah, it'll always be with you. But I listened to it, and then I heard that early clip on, and I thought, oh, wow, that's really helpful. And then I listened to it again, and so, yeah, it was good. And, for a lot of reasons here, great to see Jordan back. Great to see him as himself. Great to see him giving out these little nuggets of wisdom and truth. Great to see him strong. So I'll listen to the Douglas Murray interview too. And and I hope more people in the middle and on the left listen to this too. Now, I don't have a lot of hope that it will happen, but to whatever degree me making a video about it helps it, so be it. So thanks for watching.